Sixers coach Brett Brown set to join us here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN.
How about 70 points in the first half last night? 70 points for the Sixers in the first half last night. That's sharing the basketball and playing together as a team and just quite outsetting them. And I'm sure Brett Brown was like, fantastic. Now I can give my guys some rest.
Well, I'm sure Brett Brown has been happy the last 2 nights. He's been able to get his guys a lot of rest. And, Coach, we appreciate you jumping on board. I know you guys have an off day today.
Yeah, no, we do. We're getting ready for a big game against the Timberwolves.
You are, and the last 2 nights, these back-to-backs, you got through them, and you got through them with relative ease, and you were able to rest, your guys, Joel, 19 minutes, 20 minutes. I mean, how important is that at this stage of the season with, where he is in his load, I guess you could say, all the load management, to not have to really grind him out these last couple of games?
I think it's important for everybody. Joel is the one that gets the most attention and many would balance of maintaining a player's rhythm and trying to get them some rest is a little bit of a slippery slope. But to your point, the last 2 games, given the lead that we had going into fourth periods, it was a tremendous opportunity for Joel. And
much, slips into your psyche in that situation? Because let's be honest, you had some trouble holding on to these. And how much does it keep seeping? You know what? We've got to make sure we give up these leads to use those guys more.
I feel like the bench is something that over time we're growing. You're continuing to build and have more confidence in them. They deserve an opportunity to play. I never really felt like if in the past 2 games changing that we won't be able to hold on to lead and, starters back. Bench has done some good to play. And today, recently, it hasn't sort of my mind.
Coach, is this the stage of the season where you're starting to a little bit tightens up?
I'm sorry, ask that one more time.
I'm asking, is this the stage of the season where you're starting to tighten the rotation a bit?
Rotation thing for me is always we by and large have the same rotation. We're very calculated. A coach's up feel and sort of the metrics that help support with the groups that produce. 13 rotations are successful with the best in the NBA. And so we fluctuated a little bit between a 9-man rotation and lately a 10-man rotation with Justin Anderson coming in because of health availability reasons. But, you get to a stage at the end of the game where you have a choice to go with like Marco or JJ, Irsan or Dario. Things like that always factor into the end of games. But by and large, if you sort of study the subbing pattern, it's been quite consistent, and more importantly for us, a very large reason why we, have the guys have been great.
Brett Brown, well, this Sixers coach, they win big last night. Coach, are you still trying to figure some things out, though, with this team? A lot of new faces, Marco, Ersan coming here, Marco Bellinelli, Ersan Ilyasova coming here late, and then maybe to an extent you're still learning some things about Ben and Joel.
I mean, it's always that is true. It's always evolving. Marco really, as it relates to a substance or a significant quantity of games, that is completely in sort of the infant stages, and Irsan a little bit more, but same type of conversation. And that is true, whether it's Joel or Ben or, introducing Marco and Irsan in a more sort of definitive way to what we're trying to achieve to get ready for the playoffs. That comment is true.
Brett Brown's with us. Now, Coach, how much has Dario evolved for you in terms of have you seen the progress? Because at the beginning of the year, I got to admit, I was kind of getting nervous, like, you got this great talent who kind of pulls everything together, but he seemed like he was just not fitting. But, man, it seems that he has really worked at his game and evolved into just a tremendous, contributor in many ways. But he has grown so much from October, November basketball.
And you broke up on me right when you said the name. Who are you referring to?
Dario.
Oh, yeah, no, listen, you are correct. I mean, he has come into his own in a massive way. And whether you go to the obvious, his three-point shot, which has changed our game and his game and I think his future, to an understanding of sort of NBA defense. I think we would all be wrong to think that even with the significant sort of international play that Dario had, the NBA with its rules and my language, the different defensive schemes that we're now accustomed to and he's getting more familiar with, I think both sides of the ball, like I say, his three-point shot is what we probably notice the most. But what I see more than anything is an understanding and awareness of defensive accountability, which we want to play.
And, Coach, I know a lot of people will him and haw that this team should even be better. There was a couple of games earlier this year I'm sure that you probably still think about, a game in Sacramento or a game against Phoenix or a game against Chicago where you probably think, man, at this stage we're better than these teams. We should win these games. But do you think your team learned from losing against teams like that?
I mean, it's the NBA, and every coach and every team would have their stories. And when you just sort of put the group together and have a rookie point guard and, some newness to what we're doing, if I'm realistic and I'm harsh, but I'm also realistic, then those games, could have, would have, did happen. And to your point, how did we respond to those games that we wish we had back? I feel like, sort of the proof is in what the guys have been doing. They really have responded well lately to closing games out. I think the execution of which we're getting our key players the balls have improved. And I think especially sort of an adamance, a tenacity defensively, like how do you go close out a game? I think that we all have learned from those earlier experiences.
Coach, I wanted to ask you about pace of play because I saw Jim Lynam the other night, I think it was on Tuesday night, talk about the pace of play that the Sixers have had success with. And in the playoffs, people tend to think of the playoffs as a half-court game, but your success has come from being up-tempo and getting a lot of possessions. Is that, to you, the path to success in the playoffs, continuing that high pace of play?
I mean, in all my years in San Antonio, the 4 championship years, it's the thing that we learned the most was how to integrate Tim Duncan along with Tony Parker. And in Tony, like, you had the fastest guard in the NBA, and in Tim, you had arguably the most dominant low post player, in a while at the block. And so how do you combine the two? And with me, like, it was a tremendous learning opportunity when you have Ben Simmons, who is incredibly gifted in open court, and his breakaway speed at 6'10" is off the charts. And then the dominance of Joel Embiid at 7'2", either at a post or like a little isolation game, that turn and face game. And I think if I learned anything in those sort of 12 years in the playoffs, you have to find cheap baskets. To think you're going to get just into a half-court game and turn it into like a bloody fist fight, it's not the modern-day sport. It does end up like that if you allow it, but we do want to find that balance of pushing the pace and finding Joel. And it's really, that simple in my eyes and also that difficult in my eyes.
Hey, Coach, I know we've talked a lot over the years to be discussing about a playoff positioning at this stage of our conversation. A couple of years ago seemed to be asinine almost. Like, are you kidding me? We're growing so much. But at this stage, that number 3 seed is right there. Is that something that your team is well aware of and pushing for?
I mean, we talk about that stuff every day. You go into the locker room, you go into our building, and you'd see the Eastern Conference standings. And 2 nights ago, we woke up and we went from 6th to 4th and had that very sort of coveted home court advantage. Mm-hmm. And I think the home court is what you want to hear the loudest. If it means it's the 3rd place, fantastic. If it's the 4th place, great. We all, and led by me, you get greedy. Initially, sort of the goal was to make the playoffs, and people even sort of frowned upon that. I wanted to own it. You wanted to put it to your team. You want to put it to the media, the fans of Philadelphia 76ers, and own it. And I think that we're in good shape to play in the playoffs. Now we're in a position where we're staring at the 4th, possibly the 3rd seed. There's still a lot of basketball left to be played. with the remaining games that we have, and I think that we control our own destiny. That fact is as exciting than relying on other events. We're always trying to move up. We're certainly trying to get a home court.
41-30, 5 in a row. They're the 4 seed in the East right now. Coach Brett Brown. Now, last night you play Orlando, and this is a team that I think is kind of like, right on par with where you guys began in 2012. And to see where you are and to see where they kind of still are, is there any validation from the franchise of like, hey, we put a lot of hard work into scouting and finding players and making smart draft choices, and the fruits of that labor are starting to show for us and maybe not so much for other teams?
I can't comment on other teams, although I do hear the parallel example you've just given with Orlando. What I do know completely is that we've had a very purposeful vision from the second that they hired me. And to not blink and stay on path and continue to grow organically, and only recently do you go out and sort of, offer a lucrative contract to like a J.J. Redick type. To really only do that and not feel the need to in our eyes, spend unwise money on players that aren't going to move the needle, and try to nurture and grow our youth and develop from within, like TJ and Covington as examples, and continue to grow our draft picks. And we've obviously tripped on gold with Joel and Ben. I give so much credit to the organization. The owners haven't blinked. The direction of what we all said we were going to do when I was first hired hasn't changed. And to sort of see the fruits of the labor, especially for the fans of Philadelphia, like the Wells Fargo Center is off the charts great as a home court advantage, and the passion is really unparalleled as I travel around the league and sort of feel the venues. And I think the credit goes to the owners. I think the credit goes to the vision and not, pivoting away from stuff when things got a little bit hard.
Yeah, you look at, you bring Orlando in, the kind of a defining moment is that the ownership group was willing to wait on a guy like Dario, where maybe Orlando said, we're not willing to wait for a couple of years for a guy. And because of that patience, look what's turned out from Dario, and, they're still trying to figure out what to do. I know you don't want to comment on where they are, but that night was really, you get Joel and Dario in one night, and you had to wait a couple of years. But the patience to be able to wait, I think, is kind of something that a lot of people miss out on.
I agree, and it's pro sport. It's the way human beings are yesterday. And to stay strong, to have a very clear vision of what do you want. And we've all learned, when you can identify sort of your goals and your purpose, that you have a far greater chance of sort of holding on to that and understanding the pain of losing was real. And some of the things we went through were very real for, the organization, the city, the fans. But like I say, to everybody's credit, we stayed strong, and I feel very good about the underbelly of how we've grown the program. And it's easy to point to, 41-30 now as an example, but it's really much, much deeper than that to me as it relates to the growth of our culture.
Okay, we know the Markelle Fultz situation is probably very fluid almost day to day. If he walked up and you all came together and said, Coach, I'm ready to play tomorrow night against the Timberwolves, would he be a guy that you would be willing to put out there at this stage of the season?
I would.
Playoffs?
Yes, I would.
So you're still open to allowing him to play if he is all ready and both sides are saying, let's put this guy out there, he'd be in the rotation?
You asked me the question, would I put him in the game if he wanted to come in and play, if everybody felt that he was ready to go? And my answer is yes, I would.
Okay, so you're not closing the door on having him return to the team at this stage, which, he's a guy that I think you have said many times is a piece that you're missing, that guy that could take the ball to the basket.
Well, yeah, and I've gone on record sort of a lot saying this. When you chart the risk-reward, in my opinion, the reward of him coming into a team and what he could bring to the table outweighs the risk of does he disrupt something or, is it too late? I think my heart is with the kid. If Markelle Fultz's spirit and his body and his confidence and all those things line up, and the medical people say he's good to go, the answer that I give and I stand by, then I would play him.
Hey, Brett, before we let you go, is there a stat when you walk off the court and they hand you, like, the final stats of the game? Because, I mean, I went to Temple, so John Chaney used to hammer turnovers into my head. You guys had 30 assists last night on 42 made baskets. That could be one. Is there when you get that box score, is there something your eyes are always drawn to immediately or quickly?
There's two. Defensive field goal percentage against. How did teams shoot? How did they score against us? What was the percent that they scored? That's the first thing. And then secondly is the assist. Did we share the ball? You know, and I think that, as I've said since we've all met, if you can build a program with a defensive identity and base, and you can teach the young guys how to play together and pass, then those two things equal, I think, solidarity in a locker room, chemistry within a team. And it's simple, but those are the two things that I most look at after a game.
Tomorrow night, Wells Fargo Center, Sixers, Timberwolves. Should be fun. Sixers currently in the 4th spot. He's the head coach, Brett Brown, kind enough to join us on the Sixers off day here on the Sports Bash. Coach, good luck tomorrow night.
Yeah, thanks for having me, fellas.